Like to introduce our speaker, Gina Anderson. Gina holds a master's degree in peace research and international politics from Tübingen University and worked as an anti-bias trainer in political education. She's currently a fellow in the Mercator Fellowship on International Affairs, and in this context, she's working at the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy in Berlin. Among others, her main foci are Black and intersectional perspectives, racial and climate justice, and the prevention of right-wing extremism. She defines herself as a Black woman and intersectional feminist. Welcome, Sheena, and thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and to be here talking about my favorite topic. And thank you all for being here at this late hour, at least if you're in Europe. So maybe just a few sentences about how I thought about the structure. So I would first talk a little more about the theoretical background of intersectionality. I'm sure a lot of you already know that, just to make clear where I stand on this. And then maybe concretely talk about the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy, as we have an intersectional feminist approach to kind of let you know how we do this in practice. So I'd say that also intersectional thought has experienced somewhat of a rise, I think we could say, and is even sometimes considered a trend in mainstream feminism or mainstream feminist thought. The concept as such of intersectionality has been practiced and developed for quite a while now. So it was actually critical race scholar Kimberly Crenshaw who coined the term intersectionality in her now famous 1989 article. And since intersectionality has found its way into various discourses, mainly about justice, about discrimination, oppression, and really just like the kind of societies we would like to have and we would like to live in. But it was long before Kimberly Crenshaw came up with the term intersectionality that mainly Black feminists have elaborated on the connection between mainly race, sex, and class. And this is personally for me, the first important point I want to make here is that when we talk about intersectionality, it's important to root intersectionality in Black feminism and Black feminist thought. And Black women's struggle for more than 150 years. So it was even at the end of the 19th century already that Black feminists such as Anna Julia Cooper, Sojourner Truth, and many others spoke about their discrimination as particularly Black women. So not as being Black and not as being women, but as Black women. And although there were kind of approaches to work with the broader mainly white feminist movement, these advances were often turned down, and unfortunately they were not successful. So the concept kind of developed, if we'd say, in the dark for decades. And it was in a time of large civil movements like the civil rights movement and the second wave feminist movement that Black women felt neither appropriately represented by either those that I just mentioned, the civil rights movement and the wider feminist movement. So drawing on what many Black post-colonial and global South feminists like the Combahee River Collective or Audre Lorde and many others had highlighted before, Kimberly Crenshaw, who I'm just mentioned, as part of this growing branch of Black feminists and Black female scholars, coined the term intersectionality, and since then it's just been on a rise, luckily. And what's special here is that she centers Black women and their experiences and argues that they are often invisible, because when we talk about discrimination, and up until this point, when we talked about racism, mainly Black men were the reference point, and when talking about sexism, mainly white women were the reference point. So Black female experiences and many, many others were categorically excluded from that discussion. So in short, what she and many others since then has tried to show is that intersectionality looks at the interrelation of various social categories, and even more than race, class, and sex, but categories like gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, being able-bodied or not, religion, socioeconomic background, and many, many others, and how all of these depend on each other and intersect with each other, and do that on several levels. And we have to be aware that these categories are always embedded into social hierarchy. So that's like kind of like the theoretical background that's also very important for our work at the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy, which some already mentioned in the introduction. And we strive for this approach of intersectional feminist foreign policy. So for those of you who don't know about us yet, we are a research, advocacy, and consulting organization, mainly based in Berlin and London, and are dedicated to promoting feminist foreign policy across the globe. And we just look at it as a mechanism for equality, for justice, solidarity, and peace. And we try to do our best to draw lessons from critical feminist and race scholarship, and apply an intersectional feminist perspective in all the work that we do. And to us, because maybe in the report that you developed, and also what I took from the introduction, is that a definition is quite important for the work that we do every day. And here comes the first problem already, is that there is no general definition of feminist foreign policy. And I think this it has its good and bad sides, I'd say. But for us, or we would define feminist foreign policy as a political framework that is always centered around the well-being of marginalized people, and kind of trying to invoke processes of constant self-reflection regarding power distribution and hierarchical global systems. So we are eager at an intersectional rethinking of traditional focus in foreign policy, like military force, deterrence, violence, domination, and just trying to offer alternative views on that. So maybe we can go more into detail on that later, but just so you get an idea of what exactly we do. So we try to produce knowledge from an intersectional feminist viewpoint. So we have a lot of reports, studies, briefings. We try at our best to advise, for example, the German foreign ministry or other foreign ministries, but we also work very closely with activists and civil society, and kind of try to be a bridge between all of these branches, and just do a lot of advocacy work, do a lot of cooperation work, and try to build like a new force in foreign policy, aside from the usual ministries and work that is done. maybe I'd leave it so far with the introduction, and maybe we'll try to catch up more with questions or with whatever concerns you. Maybe that's better than me talking for 20 minutes straight.
Sheena, thank you so much for speaking to us and giving your input. That was really very interesting and wonderful, and I really enjoyed that you gave us a bit more perspective also on the theoretical and long historical view. I find personally, I always find strength and positivity in the fact of knowing that, you know, many people have come before us and been concerned with this, and it's also what's led us there, and now we can play our part. The floor is now open for questions that you may have for Sheena. So please, if anyone wants to start and interject. Yes, Leonie, just as a quick technical remark before that, you can raise your hand. You can raise your hands if you indicate you want to speak, or you can write your questions in the chat. We'll be looking at both of those. But Leonie, please get us started.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gina, for your introduction. I've been following the work at the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy for a while, so I think it's very interesting. And maybe something that you could elaborate more a little bit is the idea of, because you were talking a lot about feminist foreign policy being a part of self-reflection of power distributions and hierarchical systems. And I was wondering, do you feel that feminist foreign policy is in itself, or like in its ideal version in itself, intersectional, or do you feel like there is more that needs to be done and more reflection even within the feminist foreign policy movement to ensure intersectionality? Thank you.
Should I answer right ahead, or do you want to collect more questions?
It's as you prefer. I do think we can go ahead with this one, and afterwards, if there are no more hands raised, I also will have a question, but let's start with this. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, so I think it's a bit of both. You'll just let me know if that's not the answer to your question, but I think, yeah, it's both. So the first thing is that we at the center, and that's also my personal view, is that it's not, we can't have two pillars like feminist foreign policy and intersectional feminist foreign policy. So for us at the center, it has to be intersectional feminist foreign policy. There is no other way if we truly want foreign policy to be just, to be successful, to be really for everyone. So yeah, it's not like it has to be intersectional. And we have some great examples like Sweden, Canada. I wouldn't say that France is a really good example of feminist foreign policy, but we can debate about that. And then Mexico, and all of them strive more for liberal feminist approaches. They are not very intersectional, if I may say this. So yeah, we are on a good path, but there's like so much more work to do. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand. So it has to be intersectional from the start, but there's also within feminist movements just a lot that has been, I don't want to say it went wrong, but yeah, there maybe, how can I put this? There somehow has been a blind eye to intersectional thought, and that's sad actually, because I think feminist movements have missed out on great opportunities on that, but that's in the past. I mean, we can't change it, but I think the way to go now would be to really come together and fight a common intersectional feminist fight, and be like, okay, we have all of these great people within civil society, within activist groups. Let's combine our strengths and not be, you know, like oh, like you did this years ago and this is so bad and there's a marginalized group here, and have kind of these some people term it oppression Olympics, but really just to come together. And I think yeah, that's a very long answer to your question, but I think we just have to do both. Have an intersectional feminist foreign policy, but also always be self-reflective of our own movements, and do that as an individual, as an organization, as an activist group. Always ask yourself the question, why am I doing this? Did I think of everyone involved? Who did I exclude and why? And how can I be better at this? And yeah, make mistakes, but be aware that you make them and be willing to do better in the future. I think that's kind of the two-way lane, I'd say, to go. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sheena, and thank you, Leonie, for your question as well. Unfortunately, we will have to leave this breakout at 8:35 already in order to then continue into the smaller ones. But let's still squeeze a few more questions in, because this is really interesting. And someone wrote one in the chat, which is actually linking to the point you were making, Sheena, about the fact that there have mainly been liberal approaches to feminist foreign policy so far. And that participant was wondering if you have examples of countries which have embraced this intersectional approach within their feminist foreign policy more. And someone, Emmanuel, was also asking about, what this would look like, which is quite a broad question, but very interesting, what visions for foreign policy and international diplomacy would look like beyond patriarchal and racial hierarchies. So we'd love your thoughts on that.
Sure. I'll start with the first one and the examples. There are not many, unfortunately. I wish I would have another answer here, but there are some. So, for example, I think it was in, I don't know the exact month, maybe around June, but Hawaii, the state of Hawaii, announced that their feminist feminist responses to COVID. And although I know Hawaii, of course, is not in foreign policy, they are a U.S. American state, but still that's one example to try to really elaborate on female and also indigenous Hawaiian voices and find responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. That is especially targeting women and marginalized groups in so many ways, and that's one example. And then we have I don't know if you've seen this, but New Zealand, where Jacinda Ardern just appointed a new government, and although New Zealand, they don't have a distinctly feminist foreign policy, but now with Nanaia Mahuta, they have a foreign minister that's not only a woman, but who is a Maori woman, so an indigenous woman of New Zealand. And I think this is, to me personally, actually, that was such an inspiration to hear these news, because I don't know if she defines herself as a feminist, but that's just been such an inspiration, I think, for so many women, and especially indigenous women and women of color. And we'll see where it goes, but that's one example. And and the other countries that already have feminist foreign policies, like Sweden, I said this before, they have more of a liberal feminist approach, but I think they do know the problem. So I think people there also, they have open ears for it. We'll see where this will go in the future. And maybe to the second question, that was on how this could look like in practice, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And if you can also give, as a final thought, some words on inclusion, because we've had a few questions come in about that and how
we can make sure to be inclusive in creating intersectional feminist foreign policies, which is particularly important since by definition they affect the people who tend not to have a voice in them. Sorry, I know it's a challenge with the time, but thank you so much.
I'll do my best. So maybe to how this could look like in practice, I'll just say a few examples how we do it, maybe to just so give you an idea. So we started a project this summer, actually, that's called Feminist Foreign Policy So White, that tries or that's turning on racism and feminist foreign policy that was mainly dominated by white feminism to try to challenge racism in ideas and concepts of foreign policy. And maybe something else is we just published a report on a feminist analysis of the P5, so the 5 nuclear states, and their engagement with feminist foreign policy. And since we talked about France already, so France, they say they have a feminist diplomacy, but they are also one of the nuclear states. So that's kind of a huge contradiction. And what we are trying to do here is to produce knowledge and to just say, okay, so here you have this great approach of a feminist diplomacy, but actually nuclear policy is so gendered, and it has like so many bad impacts on racialized and gendered people, and that's it's a huge problem. So but there are barely any women in nuclear policy and on decision-making levels here. So that's one example. Or to draw attention, for example, on the combination, because that's also something that was talked about in the introduction, between gender-based violence and the arms trade, for example. So if the European Union states, for example, produce arms and they export them to other countries, also to countries with conflicts, and these weapons are used then to have gender-based violence, and mostly women are the victims of that. So that's a combination, or just an effect that's barely turned on, and in arms exports control it doesn't play any role. So it's a problem, and we need to draw on this. So that's some of the practical examples of what we do, and how can it be inclusive. I think one thing that each and every one of us can do as an individual already is to just ask yourself the question and be self-reflective, like, why am I doing this, and who am I doing it for, and is it still the same reason I had yesterday, and are like the circumstances still the same? To just always be very attentive to your surroundings, the people around you, what's going on, and try to implement as much information as you can. That's hard, it's super challenging, and you won't always be able to implement all of that, but I think it's important to at least have the approach and the will to do that. And another thing is to be uncomfortable for other people. Like, don't be nice if you see something that's going wrong, or you see something that really bothers you. Speak up and say, okay, but I would like to be included in this conversation, or why is that person not included in this conversation? Like, really ask those uncomfortable questions, because what a lot of people or how often intersectionality and intersectional feminism and feminist foreign policies practice, that people, like, they include feminists somewhere and then they think the work is done, but it's not. You have to ask the uncomfortable questions and go this path.